All right, welcome everyone. We are going to get started today with our symposium. Thank you for joining us for this symposium on empowering family healing, recognizing resilience after immigration trauma. We have our wonderful speaker, Jeanette Lopez-Urbina, here with us today. But before I introduce her, I would like to begin with an acknowledgement of the devastating impact that has occurred in Los Angeles and other counties this past week. It is deeply alarming and threatens the safety, dignity, and unity of our communities. The communities and the therapists and organizations that continue to show up with courage and passion. CVCA and the Child Abuse Prevention Center firmly oppose all forms of family separation. The trauma of separation harms children, parents, and entire communities. We believe every family deserves the opportunity to stay whole, supported, and safe. We recognize the fear and pain many are experiencing. So to those personally affected, we stand with you. This is a safe place, so please make sure to do what you need to take care of yourself during these 2 hours. I appreciate all of you for showing up today. I would now like to introduce you to our wonderful speaker, Jeanette Lopez-Urbina. Jeanette has worked in the mental health and social services field for over 18 years, providing services extensively to youth and families, especially in the area of trauma, including supporting youth and families in specialized services that address gang involvement, sexual exploitation, and immigration trauma. Jeanette is a bilingual Salvadorian American practitioner who enjoys practicing mostly from a social justice, relational, and psychodynamic approach. Jeanette currently holds a private practice in Berkeley, California called Roots in Healing. We are grateful to have her here with us today to share her insights on a topic of such significance, especially during this critical time. I am going to hand it over to Jeanette now.
Thank you, Sadie. All right, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Just so you know, Sadie and I were planning this training before the current events that took place or picked up last week. And so we were just kind of sitting with, before the beginning of this training, the significance of the timing of when this training is taking place and the current events. Just so you all know, as a first generation child of immigrants, it brought in a lot of pain for me, what's been happening, not just last week from the beginning of this presidential term, and even historically from before in various other ways. And as I sat with clients and holding their experiences, I mostly work with Latino women in my practice. I've realized how much I'm still trying to figure out and grab hold to some level of grounding as this is happening while I'm supporting others. So I want to be very transparent with you all today, as there is over 100 people here today, that I have a commitment to try to do that for you in the next 2 hours, and also know that I am here with you feeling a lot of things that you are likely feeling. It may be in different ways depending on our social locations and our roles, etc. But this collective is feeling it. And so I'm going to do my best to try to deliver information that I hope will be helpful for you all in the work that you do with children and families, but also recognize that it's just painful all around, and it'll be hard for all of us to engage in the next 2 hours as well. So in that light, before I get started with the material, I am curious to know if a few of you can speak up and let me know, what is your hope for today? We only have 2 hours together. Even as I created my slides and my information, I was like, I wish I had more than 2 hours, because there's so much to cover. And I'm going to do my best. And so sometimes what helps with that is when I hear from some people about what the hopes are, it helps me know what areas I want to focus on and maybe some areas to skip. And so I am curious if anybody wants to speak up about, like, what would be most helpful today. Erica, did
Yeah,
you go for it?
I I'm just gonna be transparent. I'm a privileged person, right? Like I'm not experiencing what those around me are experiencing. Um, my husband's a person of color, but he's Native American, right? So there's still some pain with what's happening around, right? And so for me, I think this training is more about like hearing others' experiences or your experiences, and especially with the young children I'm working with, and they're worried about their parents, right? How do I not feel hopeless, right? Like, how can I just give them, because all I can be is support, right? Like I've shared with them, I can't change any of this. Like, and they're so used to as a therapist, right? I can change some other things for them. Like I can help them with a relationship. I can help them at school. I can be an advocate that this is a big system to change. And so I think I just want to hear your and other people's ideas about how to just support, especially children, but all of my clients that are going through something that I don't think I will ever experience as a human, right? And hold space for them in the way that I can.
Thank you, Erica. Someone else was going to say something.
Yeah, good morning, Maribel Landeros. It's hard this is the first time talking about it really. So I think just even having the conversation, I do community engagement, so I do workshops, I do tabling. I interact with everyone in the community, and um, I, I don't know that there's anything specific. I think anything you're just able to share with us, I think it will validate, it will just support our own well-being. And like I said, this is the first time that anybody's really talking about it. So whatever you can share to help ourselves, and maybe like things that we want to reinforce in the community. One of the workshops I do is resiliency work information. So I think that's always good to highlight. But I just want to know, am I missing anything in this conversation?
Thank you, Maribel. Something I mentioned to Sadie before we got started today is probably like y'all are doing probably more than 90% of what we should be doing already. But again, like I think Maribel, you're speaking to it very beautifully. How do we have a space to know that we're doing it in a collective where that's where the true impact lives? And then also this pace, a place where you guys can get support, receive that validation, and reassurance that the interventions that you're likely already doing, the support you're offering is highly effective.
Thank you.
I definitely want to second what Maribel mentioned. I think that she highlighted something important, right? The well-being of everyone that's here. And also what Erica mentioned, we're all here, we all hold some sort of privilege. And how do we ensure that we are being mindful about taking care of ourselves, right? I think a lot of the times as folks that have experienced, trauma in different platforms, different avenues, like how do we prioritize ourselves to ensure that we are going to be good and we are going to be okay to continue to fight for those that don't have a voice. So, right, without being, and I think that sometimes that's the one component that we miss because I think that, again, coming from a Mexican background for me, right? We are handed these roles without really without our input. We're just kind of thrown in these roles to be caregivers, to take care of others, to look out for others. And we fail to think about ourselves and how some of these roles impact our own well-being and how we dismiss our own needs. And so I think that, thank you, Jeanette, for being here and kind of touching on that mental health component too, right? How do we stay resilient? How do we take care of ourselves to ensure that we're able to carry others?
Yes, thank you, Marlene. Okay, that was really helpful, folks. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the slides, and because that really helped me feel like, okay, we got some slides that hopefully will speak to this. We have some information set up for you that will offer that support. Okay, let me make sure that I am setting you all up while I share my screen. And thank you for those of you who are able to have your cameras on. Having some people have your cameras on helps for a better training because I like being able to talk to people. I don't do very well with just like talking to by myself and hearing me talk. I refuse to ever do a webinar for that reason. So thank you. Okay, so hopefully throughout all of what we're going to be covering today is going to be built in with resilience in mind. And one thing I just want to say that sometimes resilience can be very controversial because some of the recent understanding about resilience is like, why does anybody have to be resilient? We need to be able to change the systems around people so that they themselves don't have to be resilient to these systems. But unfortunately, the reality in which we live in, these systems do impact the mental health of many individuals, families, and systems. And therefore, it's important for us to still talk about resilience. The other thing I want to mention is that the beginning of this training does have a download of trauma material. And so a lot of you came in for that support around your secondary trauma. Some of you came in for that support around like strategies to feel empowered, and we're not there yet. And sometimes folks are like, give me the strategies. I don't want to hear about like the stuff that's really hard or the history. It's really hard to be able to have informed strategies without knowing that backdrop and that history. And so this is why I start with that. But I do bring in with some strengths in the Latinx community. That was another disclaimer I didn't mention. I'm going to bringing this in as a Latina myself, working with the Latina or Latinx community. That's the primary focus, but we also want to acknowledge that a lot of the tensions are not just happening with the Latinx community. It is happening across many immigrant groups. And it's likely, picking up further to reach to various immigrant groups. So it's not just a Latinx issue. Okay, so I won't go deep into this slide, but when we talk about currently what's happening with detentions and who's at risk, right? I just want to read a couple of stats around that to just demonstrate how big the issue is. There is 13.7% of the total US population is foreign born. 12% of children were born outside of the US. And according to the Center for Migration Studies of New York, out of about 21 million Hispanic immigrants in the US, about 7 million are undocumented.
Jeanette,
And then, yeah.
sorry about that. Would you mind, just so it's a little bigger, can you click on the slideshow one so that we can see it just a little bigger?
The slideshow will impact
Oh,
for me to be able to see the faces and stuff. So
not a problem.
let me see if I extend the screen a little bit, if that will help, if it does that. Does that help? Okay, great.
Yes,
Thank
definitely
you.
helpful. And for any of our folks on the call that might not still be able to see, you can actually zoom in on your Zoom screen yourself. So you'll just click, and then however you zoom on your computer, whether that's the 2-finger split, you can zoom in closer on any of the material that might be hard to see.
Thank you. And hopefully I can give a copy to you all once we're done, and I'll send it over to Sadie and Bryn. Okay. And also, Sadie and Bryn, if there's anything in the chat that I might miss, let me know, because my screen cannot cover all the boxes and I can't see the chat box.
Perfect, not a problem.
Thank you. And then before I go further into the material, I want to just go over some terminology. So Hispanic, some of the statistics that I bring in our information refers to the Hispanic population. When we refer to the Hispanic population, those are individuals from Spanish-speaking countries. So a lot of people are Hispanic and Latino or Latinx. However, that's not necessarily always the case. So folks from Spain are Hispanic, but they're not of Latin America. So they're not Latino, Latinx, or Latine. People from Brazil are not Spanish speakers, but they mostly speak Portuguese, and they are from Latin America, so they're part of the Latinx community. And so just to have that distinction. And then also I'm going to move away from using Latinx. I'm going to try to use Latine. And the reason for that, folks, is because even though both are supposed to be to not, for those who don't subscribe to the binary, Latinx was something that was coined in academia in the United States. So a lot of folks from Latin America were not feeling comfortable with this term as a result. There's also a lot of transphobia, which I'll talk about later, about some of the origins around that. And so therefore there's a pushback for that, but also because there's some grammatical issues with using X. So when you talk about the children of folks like sons, hijos, right, with an O at the end, that means sons, right? Hijas is daughters. And so if we have a non-binary child and you use hijex, that sounds weird. And so that didn't quite fit very well. And I believe in South America, and I don't remember exactly where the origin was, but the use of the word Latine with the E at the end was being used already. And so this is what's gaining more traction, and it works grammatically better. So hijos, hijas, and hijes. And so I'm trying to move now to using more Latine. But you're welcome to use whatever you feel that you're most comfortable with. Latinx is completely fine. All right, and then before we go into some of the traumatic history, I want to talk about some of the strength, resilience, and hope, esperanza, for this community. And the reason this is important, folks, and when I go through the next couple slides, how I want you, and I recommend you holding this, is that this is part of your strategies and interventions. When we're talking about resilience, the resilience already exists for these communities and any disenfranchised, marginalized community. How else do we continue to be here on these lands, on these stolen lands? How is it that we continue to thrive in many ways, right? Not just survive. And it's because we have had these strengths and we've had these resiliency factors as a part of us from the beginning of time. And so when I go through this material, think about the ways that you can see this in the families you work with, the children you work with, and how do we access these so that folks can see these in themselves, because they do exist and they continue to help us thrive. So the first one I want to go over, if anyone's heard of this, the Latino health paradox. And what this refers to, folks, is that for early generations, for first generations of immigrants arriving to the US, they tend to have more positive health outcomes and resilience than those generations who've been in the US longer. Isn't that wild? So my generation, who was born in the US, right? I tend to have more risk of health and mental health, poor mental health and health outcomes than my parents did. And we would sometimes think of the opposite, right? Because we hear about all the stories about what a lot of immigrants have experienced and lived through prior to arriving to the US. So how could this be? There isn't a full answer to this, but when I talk about this in terms of mental health, where the first or second, third generations are more prone to depression and PTSD, sometimes what we think about is, one, having to be bicultural in a new society, a new world that your parents didn't have to navigate, and how many first we have to go through and how stressful that is. The lack of social support, because immigrants leave their social supports back at home, right? And thirdly, and it escaped me on my thirdly, right? But I'm thinking about, there's ways in which I think that privilege offers room for us to experience things that when we don't have the privilege to experience it, we don't. For example, PTSD. What we learned about PTSD mostly came from veterans from war. When folks are surviving the war, are they feeling the PTSD symptoms? Not necessarily. That's why it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. Post. People end up feeling it when they're safer at home, right? Or away from the war, away from the trauma. So if we think about that in terms of the parent generation of immigrants who arrive, they have been experiencing that level of trauma. And when have they felt safe in life? Versus later generations might feel safer and might have more access then to experience these post symptoms, right? So those are some of the theories that have been thrown out to this Latino health paradox. Extended familiar relationships includes extended levels of support when accessible is highly valued in our society. So being in a collective, being part of a system, relying on each other in this cooperative, interdependent way is likely what's helped us survive for generations. Spirituality, we tend to be very religious or spiritual. And that is definitely a buffer. Research has demonstrated that once and over again, that folks who have these belief systems do support them in going through adversity. And then hope and financial and overall safety security for generations to come. After migrating to the US and going through some of the layers of immigration trauma that I'll be talking about soon enough, right? It is so helpful for folks that even after the compounding trauma that you've survived, that you have this hope for a better future for not just yourself, but for your children, your grandchildren, and other generations to come. And whether or not we believe in the American dream, many immigrants do. And that's what helps them get up every morning to go to work and to survive and try to thrive for the future of their generations, right? And so that is something to respect and honor in a family. And that we also are pretty much collectivists. I say pretty much because these worldviews, folks, we have collectivism on one end, individualism on the other end, and we think about it on a spectrum. And a lot of Asian cultures tend to be very high in the collectivist spectrum versus the US is very individualistic. And especially with currently what's happening in the US and the climate, it's rugged individualism, right? And so the Latinx community tends to be closer to collectivism, but because of the impact of imperialism and globalization, we've kind of moved a little bit more towards the center, I would say. But I still believe that our roots and a lot of our beliefs are still rooted in collectivism. And so what is collectivism, right? It's this emphasis on the tribe and community. It means that we value the health of the group is utmost important. If the group is healthy, I'm healthy. But for individualism, it's my health is most important. If I don't look out for myself, who will? So I got to take care of me. Okay. The beauty about collectivism, and it has various strengths, right? And we know that's having robust social support networks also supports people in their resiliency, right? So it's already embedded in our culture and our worldview that we believe that social support is the way to exist, right? Is interdependently and connected with others, right? So this creates a normalization of seeking support, trusting others, and trying to work towards group harmony. So that can definitely be a support. And I know that folks might be like thinking, but wait, it's hard for the Latinx or Latinx community to seek out mental health services. It's hard because it's inaccessible. Not because we're not necessarily open to it. I know that sometimes there's like, especially in social media and pop psychology, and a lot of first gen young people are like, oh, my parents don't believe in mental health. We don't really actually know the statistics for sure on that necessarily being true based on social media, because I remember reading this study where we're looking at just psychologists when the Hispanic is how they refer to this population. When the Hispanic population went to get support for psychologists, the issue was not for them to get there to talk to a psychologist. The issue was for them to stay in services. And it was about a 50% dropout rate. And the reason that there wasn't a sticking to the services and there was such a high dropout rate was because they didn't feel heard or seen in their worldview and their values. And they were experiencing language barriers. So the issue wasn't them getting to the services, it was staying in the services. So I think this aligns with this piece about like, because it's normal for us to rely on others for support, that might leave us more open to get the support we need from the services that are offered. We tend to be an interdependent community where relationships and reciprocity is very much of value. Worldview shapes the way we talk with each other, how we relate to each other, the way we think, the way our language is built. I'm right now here in El Salvador. I stay here for some months throughout the course of the year. And something that I get reminded of so much when I'm here in El Salvador is how much our conversations revolve around people. This is why they call us chismosas, like, gossipers. We're not chismosas. We just like talking about people. Right? Because that's how we revolve our world is around relationships. The first thing they ask you when you see somebody is how have you been? How's your family? I'm estranged from my brother. And when I come to El Salvador and I see family, they always ask me, how's your brother? And I have to be like, I think he's fine. Because even for me to say that I'm estranged by him, I don't want to hear the soapbox and the like you need to be talking to your brother. All you have is each other and all of that stuff, right? But if I go to an event, a social event in the US, what's the first thing people ask me? What do you do? How's work? That shows you the different worldviews. And so we are about relationships and people as a collectivist society, and individualist societies tend to be about yourself and this like capital is a track of success. We value cooperation, kindness, and the other's needs. Versus those with individualistic worldview, the values tend to be a sense of freedom, independence, competition. Right? And we believe in group wellness versus self-actualization, right? So individuation is not something we strive for. So something to think about here is a lot of Western psychology has been built on self-actualization, the humanistic theories, right? Like be the best version of yourself. And a lot of the interventions we come through in our field and we learn about is what? How to support the individual to get better, right? Very much self-directed. Not so much on group wellness. Sure, there's some family therapy interventions and models. And so that's a little closer to collectivism, but the vast majority of what we do tends to be more individualistic. The tricky part of that, even when we look at human development and what we've learned in school, what is human development and the stages of life, that is from a Western perspective. Let me give you an example. When we think about teenagers, for those of you, I'm sure there's many here who work with teens, how many times have you worked with an immigrant family, a BIPOC immigrant family like Latina, and they are very upset and calling their child selfish and rude and maybe even agresivo because the teenager is being very to themselves, spending a lot of time in their room, on the phone, wanting to be spending time with friends. They're storming and not really wanting to engage the family anymore. And the parents are having a big reaction towards this. Right. And then we come in and we normalize and we say, oh, yeah, teenagers are teenagers. They go through a storming stage because they're trying to figure out who they are and they're trying to individuate from the family system so that they can then go to college, choose their career and go on their path. Right. And that it's really normal for them to push back like toddlers do. And toddlers like, no, I do it. No, I do it. And we're getting a teenage version of that. Right. Yeah, that's correct in terms of the human development that we've learned in Western culture. Teenagers do not go through that in collectivist cultures in the same way. Because we're striving for interdependence versus independence, there isn't that drastic storming that happens. Teenagers in collectivist cultures do not keep to themselves. Instead, they become kind of like what I would refer to from a Western lens, like a little mini adult, where they end up having more responsibility to the family, but they still might have a little bit more independence, but not as drastically as like what's happening in the United States. So a lot of immigrant parents are seeing their kids go through this stage in a different way that they've never experienced or seen in their life before. And how much room do we give those parents to adjust to that culturally or make sense of it even? Right? And so it's really important to recognize this because there's ways that the parents, that's a strength because the parents are trying to see like, what about how I grew up in my culture? Because we didn't have to storm in this way. It was actually a more harmonious process than what happens for their teens in the US culture. Right? Because it's about togetherness. So I had the privilege as a US citizen and for other privileges to be able to come to El Salvador every summer. And my mom's good friend had kids our age when we were growing up, and we'd come here almost every summer, like I said. And so we'd spend the night at their house at times. And when it was the weekend, whatever the parents did, the kids went with them. And we did too. So if there was a family member who was sick in the hospital, we'd go, even if we've never met this family member before. When we had to go grocery shopping, we all went together. And then in the afternoon, the young people, teenagers, we would spend some time on our own. But everything was done with family. And that's what the parents want. And in the culture of the US, right? Because kids who grow up in the US are going to be more Western in their cultural understanding of the world, that they're going to go a little bit at odds with the parents, right? And they're trying to individuate. So that causes some shifts. And then some other strengths in families that I want to highlight. And sometimes this gets lost in the work we do because why are we intervening? We're intervening with families who are experiencing struggles, challenges. And so sometimes we don't see the greater picture. If we look at the Latinx community, what are the strengths in families outside of those who are just the ones seeking support from us, right? So immigrant individuals and families demonstrate flexibility and adaptability in navigating a whole new life and culture. So think about that too, folks, right? No matter what happens, we're going to do our best to offer buffers and supports, and the hope is that these detentions that are happening won't continue much longer. But in the meantime, for those who are impacted, we have generations of having to be flexible and adaptable. We survive, right? And I'll bring this up a little bit more later. We also have the value of working hard and not giving up, como echarle ganas. This part is the one I want to highlight because social media also knocks this strength. This strength is what keeps us going every day. And I'll let me explain a couple of stories around this. The first one is when COVID was hitting hard, and I have a brother, another brother, not the estranged one, who did not take he did not do his COVID vaccine. And he ended up being hospitalized with COVID and on a ventilator. And during that time, it was really painful because when you heard that somebody was on the ventilator, they didn't come out of it. And the way I work, because I have my practice and I teach, if I don't teach a class or I don't see clients, I don't get paid, right? So I didn't have family leave. I couldn't afford to go on family leave because of what was happening. And it was one of those situations where it dragged on. So we got the first call on Christmas. And then he didn't recover he didn't wake up from the induced coma until the end of February. So for all those weeks, I had to work while knowing that my brother might pass away. And we would get different information, like he might need long-term care, he might pass away, we don't know how he's going to wake up. And I was teaching a multicultural class, which is really hard. I was seeing clients, which was really hard. And I remember talking to my dad, and my dad, I used to find him so insensitive. So my dad was born in El Salvador in 1938 in a semi-rural community, very different than how I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And my dad was always like, echale ganas, hay que seguir adelante, just kind of move forward and don't look back. And there isn't time for feelings. And I'd be like, that's so invalidating. And I'd get so upset with him. And this time around, I said, Dad, I don't know what to do, because I was also being a translator between him and my adult nephew, who was raised by my brother and mostly spoke English. My dad mostly speaks Spanish, and having to be that translator. And I was like, this is so overwhelming. I was like, Dad, I don't know how to keep doing this. And he's like, you just have to do it. You just have to move forward and don't look back and keep going. He's like, there isn't room for emotions. And I was like, you know what? This is where it works. He's absolutely right. I have to keep going until there's something that's resolved in this prolonged crisis, where then I can feel all the feelings. And it worked. It's what got me through. So sometimes when we think about this, right, we think about how in social media, we see young people go to their mom and say, I have depression. And the mom's like, what is that with depression? Get over it, pick up a broom and sweep. And then we clutch our pearls and we're like, how invalidating and dismissive. While forgetting the backdrop and the background of that mother's life. What was her life like before she arrived in the US? I do immigration evaluation and psychological evaluations for immigration cases. And the stories are what? Sexual abuse, physical abuse, extreme poverty, war, gang violence, other community violence, poor housing, no support, estranged family members because of trauma, right? Think of the unrest that's been happening in the last week, at least for those, if anyone here is in LA. Now, imagine that violence is right outside your front door every day. Is there room to get depressed? What happens if you're like, I'm so depressed, I won't get out of bed? What's going to happen to you and your kids if you have them? So what do these moms do? They're like, I'm going to sweep. I'm going to stay busy. I'm going to wash dishes. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to keep it going. And that's also a form of behavior activation, according to cognitive behavioral therapy. What does cognitive behavioral therapy say? Go for a walk, take a shower, to activate you out of the depression. I will acknowledge, though, what's missing there is empathy and all that stuff, but empathy comes with privilege and safety. Right? And so it doesn't mean that we don't work on that. Absolutely, we do, but we shouldn't judge so harshly those parents who are like, I don't believe in depression. I don't believe in trauma, because that's what helped them get through. And it could be a strength. Children display strong social skills, developing friendships that transfer in school and beyond because we're so relational. Parenting has a lot of strength in our community where we have high levels of warmth, supportiveness, and fathers are involved because of the strong family values like familismo. We typically offer family stability, household composition, familiar support. First generation typically live in two-parent household, which provides stability, and we tend to live in multi-generational homes, which supports in the burden of finances, caretaking for children, and other household responsibilities. And there's high co-parenting relationships in raising children, like I mentioned. Okay, sometimes I get a little sidetracked on stories. I'm going to reel them in to make sure that I'm still covering a lot of the information here. Okay, so let's talk about now the resilience in surviving historical and intergenerational trauma, pain, or wounds. With this, I'm going to be focusing on typical trauma that has been experienced in our community, including immigration trauma. But I want to acknowledge a list before I go into immigration trauma. We have experienced the impact of colonization and colonialism, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, which has been the backdrop that fuels a lot of what the current issues are today in our countries of origin and why folks must flee. And we're not talking about, and I'm just going to go ahead and advance it. We're not just talking about this colonization of the past. We're talking about current colonization and the way that it continues to exist in various forms. Often when people say history repeats itself, people expect history to repeat itself in the same exact way and not with other costumes or masks. And that's what ends up happening over generations. And that's why people keep getting duped and not recognizing it, right? So there is this colonization of the past. This was a painting from a mural here in El Salvador. And it just speaks to some of the violence, right, that we experienced through colonization. But there's also present day colonization, folks. That could be included through the influence of media, including social media, movies, etc., on the narratives of the Latinx community. It could be because of tourism. When tourism takes place, and that's definitely picked up since COVID and people working more online, and there's a lot of gentrification that's happening in many countries like Mexico, El Salvador, and I'm sure other parts of Latin America, where you have wealthy people coming to be tourists in these countries. The locals are serving these people. Most of the jobs become around tourism. It's similar to what happened to Hawaii. Then it becomes, the nation becomes dependent on tourism, and it leaves tourists basically having most of the power and privilege to access the resources of the land, versus the locals end up getting marginalized and pushed out because the prices go up because of tourism. And then also they are having to only have jobs to work for the tourists coming in and the hospitality type of owners versus like being small business owners that can survive on their own. There's various other ways that I can talk to, but for the sake of time, I won't go into, but those are some examples. And then this one where mega corporations like Walmart are arriving in various of these countries, and people prefer them because of the original colonization, where folks think that white is better, US goods and European goods are better, and so they no longer go to local businesses, and that pushes them out to have to go and work for Walmart for minimum wage for the rest of their life. Because of the impact of colonization, that colonization and the missionaries involved with the European settlers, they're the ones who brought in ideas around patriarchy, the binary in terms of gender and sex, among a lot of other problematic themes that tend to arise in our cultural patterns. And so that creates judgment, bias, and discrimination. And so often that's what replicates so much trauma over into generations in a lot of families that have experienced colonization. And so what ends up happening is that over time, it's perceived that trauma and culture become one when it's actually two separate things. And we have to be careful to recognize the difference between culture and trauma, so that we're not saying that, like the spanking of children, that comes from colonization. The European settlers were the ones who brought in a lot of this violence in terms of how to get people to submit and obey. That gets learned over time. And then we sometimes as providers and say, this is a cultural norm. Is it cultural? Or is it a common pattern that has been learned over time because of a trauma response from colonization? And so as providers, we have to be aware of that so that we're not further judging, shaming, blaming communities that have experienced so much harm through colonization in other ways. Other challenges include acculturation or culturative stress. The expectations on children may shift because values may be different from the countries of origin versus the US. Families have to adapt from a more collectivist culture to an individualistic one. That's a whole process, especially because children tend to adopt more of a Western culture. There's less family supports because of migration. A lot of families, because they migrate in a stepwise manner, there's separation that happens and children are often left behind to reunify later. As a result, it leaves room and risk for attachment trauma, which I'll talk a little bit next. Marginalization from resources, especially for undocumented families. And so low access to education, may be experiencing a lot of poverty, and then language barriers further exacerbate this. In countries of origin, the infrastructures of formal services, like all of you who are here present today, doesn't exist for a lot of countries in many ways, or parts of countries. When I do evaluation reports, when I talk about trying, like, let's say someone has to be forced to come here to El Salvador, there's one psychiatric hospital and it's in the main city. And so for folks who might have a psychiatric emergency in the outskirts of the capital, how are they going to get to the hospital if it's like 2-3 hours away, right? Models of therapy, mental health interventions have been popularized from Western middle-class white and urban societies. And so a lot of our families do not fit that narrative on what's effective. And there's a lot of generational wounding and trauma. And the reason I kind of bring in wounding is because the term trauma, a lot of our families do not connect with, because that comes from the medical model. And that wounding, a lot of Native Indigenous scholars have written that most of, like, when we talk about trauma, what tends to land better for their community is wounding, like wounding experiences. And so let's get into the heart of this training. And I'm sorry if I'm going quickly. Feel free, folks, to anyone stop me at some point if it feels like I'm going too fast, okay? All right, so when we talk about immigration trauma, there's often 3 layers to consider. There's the historical trauma, which I started to talk about already, and the current conditions of the countries that folks are fleeing from. There's the potential trauma that folks may experience on the journey to cross over, especially in an undocumented manner, and the trauma that continues in the US. I'm going to give little tiny nuggets of each of these, so just to give you an idea of what each of these mean, but definitely I will not do it justice today. So what fuels immigration trends from Latin America, right? Like, what are the current conditions that folks are fleeing from? People are in search of economic opportunities. Agricultural communities are impacted by climate change. And so we're seeing more and more people migrate from rural communities, fleeing a political upheaval that has been part of our history since the beginning of colonization. In El Salvador, did you all know that not too long ago, only 14 families owned most of the lands of El Salvador and exploited the local mestizo or indigenous community? 14 families, that's it. And it's not that long ago. And those 14 families have origins from Spain, right? England, and I forget where else. Fleeing violence, including cartels and gangs, femicide, child labor, or abuse. And many are trying to reunite with families, especially children of immigrants. So I'm going to play this video that shares some of the stories of folks trying to cross over.
Y por eso nosotros huimos.
Es duro el camino, los sacan carrera, caemos al charco, los alambramos.
Los adolescentes vienen ahora con esta ilusión. Ahora Joe Biden va a facilitar esta entrada de ingreso como refugiados.
Pero confío en Dios que vamos a llegar, la verdad. Sí. Tengo 3 meses y pues la verdad ahorita me he sentido como cansada porque como casi no hemos comido, no hemos desayunado, entonces me siento como a veces como voy a desmayar, pero voy con fuerza, más por darle fuerza a ellos.
Lo que voy a hacer yo es entregar mi inmigración para que ellos me den un auxilio político. Una por los niños, para que a mi hijo ya no sufra más.
Me da lástima ver a mi familia así, pero confío en Dios que vamos a llegar, la verdad. Sí.
Esperas.
Mi mamá, mi esposa, mi hijo, toda la familia, mi abuela. Tenemos 5 días caminando. Bien duro el camino. Sí, miedo sí. Pero ¿y cómo? Si tenemos que hacerle para adelante, menos para atrás.
Más adelante venía la amiga y salimos corriendo 3 veces y pues ya de ahorita en la tarde descansamos y pues ya seguimos toda la noche.
Uno tiene que arriesgarse a todo, pero mejor me arriesgo aquí en la vida que me voy para otro lado. Si me voy por Honduras, allá, sin necesidad que me arriesgue la vida, me la pueden hasta quitar.
Siempre empezamos antes de salir al camino. Eso los ayuda, llevamos una fe que vamos a llegar a Estados Unidos. La calor los está matando, ya no no podemos avanzar más.
Si sigue este flujo en esta proporción, puede dispararse un caos en estas fronteras.
Nos han contado que el presidente de Estados Unidos iba a mandar a quitar todos los atrasos en el camino, que a ver si los ayudo ahorita. Si ellos tienen viajes para acá, que lo piensen bien, porque es duro este camino. No es para cualquiera este camino.
Okay, so it's heartbreaking watching these videos and experience of folks, and the question is always like, who risked their life at this point and why? There's a National Geographic episode that I saw around elephants, and the whole episode had to do with a herd of elephants where the watering hole dried up and they had to migrate to a new watering hole. That's what people, animals have done from the beginning of time. And yet these borders have been created. So people, as who you saw in the video, are meant to stay out, no matter if their watering holes dried up. So what is to happen to them if they don't migrate? Right? And I'm going to get to that in a bit. I also find it surprising and not surprising in social media, especially right now with what's currently happening, especially in LA, and seeing how much comments, and I don't know if they're bots or what the heck it is, but people who will shame folks and say, why can't they just get in line and come here legally? It's not an option for many countries for anybody to come legally. And even one was like, if you're in the country for 30 years undocumented, why don't you just get citizenship? If it was that easy, it's wild to me that folks do not understand that. So let's go into now more about the trauma residing in the US and this piece around the loss of home. And this image is really painful, and it's one that I pulled from Instagram. And this piece around let us stay planted, home is here. And this is not the first time we're experiencing a loss of home as a community. So from the book, Decolonizing Therapy from Dr. Jennifer Mullen, she brings in this concept of the loss of home. And she refers to home as a sense of belonging, safety, and connection. Think about the families you work with, or think about your own families if you identify within this community. How many times have you lost a sense of belonging, safety, and connection because of what's happening around our world? So let's talk about that impact, right? Forced migration, including deportations, natural disasters, especially recently due to climate change, foreclosures, stealing of land, loss due to violence can all cause a loss of home and other forms of trauma or collective wounding. As a result, we experience depersonalization. A lot of Latinx folks, a lot of Latina folks, from my clients to myself, to colleagues, etc., friends, family, there's this piece about like, who are we? Right? How many of us can even say who we are racially? Right? Because I know my Indigenous ancestry has been erased from the storytelling of my family. I had to do ancestry DNA, especially with my light skin privilege, to be like, wait a minute. Do I have Indigenous roots? And I do. A large percentage of it. But I have forgotten because I was taught to forget. because of these events that my family has gone through. My kid was born with anxiety and a very sensitive fight, flight, freeze response. She also has ADHD. My dad has ADHD. My brother has ADHD. So I know that it's in, genetic, but also ADHD has been known to be an adaptive trait. Right? If she lived in a rural community in El Salvador, maybe ADHD wouldn't be a thing. It would fit better. And then for her with anxiety, I wonder why she was so evident of having anxiety from a toddler age when she didn't experience any trauma at home. Oh, it's genetic. Why is that getting passed on? Because anxiety protects you from bad things happening, supposedly. That's what it's trying to do. Right? So yes, we experience depersonalization, increased disconnect from culture, identity, practices. A sense of hypervigilance tends to take over because of this disconnect from home. Through a loss of home, a fundamental part of ourselves has been removed and separated, and it can create a disconnected and distorted sense of self identity and a long-term identity crisis, which results in a need to assimilate or acculturate. We are currently being told right now, don't speak Spanish in public. That's forced assimilation, the replacing of our cultural roots. And even Spanish is not our mother tongue. Indigenous languages are. So wait, from our indigenous language, we're forced to speak Spanish or Portuguese. And now that we're speaking Spanish in the US, we're told that that's pretty much wrong and you can't do that. That's dangerous. So speak English. And then when we start speaking English and we have to migrate for other reasons, then that's going to be wrong. And then when can we retain any sense of identity? It also increases an increased sense of failure or imposter syndrome. I don't belong. I am less than. I'm not worthy. Wonder where we get this messaging. And effects include fear, poverty, political oppression, feelings of abandonment, separation, intra and interpersonal conflict, exploitation, racism, discrimination, isolation, family disruptions, etc. is all a result of what we've been through. So I'm going to play one more video, and this one talks about the Northern Triangle, where a lot of migrants have been coming the last 10 years, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. El Salvador has gone down in numbers. I won't be able to give a lot of information around that today, but I will briefly touch on it in the upcoming slides. But so this is a little older video, but it still speaks to, in summary, what are the reasons that we have been migrating to the US for the last several decades, and the involvement of countries like the US in that migration, in drying up the watering hole. Okay, so this is a good moment to make sure that you're taking care of yourselves, right? Check your breathing, your body, see if there's any tension, right? Make sure that you have ways to take care of yourselves, fidget toys, blankets. Okay. I'm gonna continue on. I want to make sure that I get to the point of like strategies and also like acknowledging the secondary trauma. Okay. Okay, so in that video, it briefly summarizes US intervention and involvement and how that has contributed so much of what we're still experiencing today. Just because the war ended in the 1990s or early 90s does not mean that the effects are still not there and that there's other ways that the US has intervened. My husband, I met him here in El Salvador. He grew up here, and in the 80s, he was a child growing up during that war, and he was impacted, right? And so how many parents do you work with that have witnessed a lot of what was said in that video and various things beyond even the war? All right, so we're going to continue with some of the trauma that continues in the US as we see currently today with the detentions, right? This community still experiences discrimination, bias, and racism, especially for Black and Indigenous Latina people. We experience invisibility and erasure, othering, dehumanization. I saw this from social media and it broke my heart because we see it in every truth post from the president. These criminals and illegals and anything else that's dehumanizing to justify the cruelty of what's happening. Experiencing disempowerment and silencing. Difficulty also in accessing mental health and often being excluded from services because of language barriers. Discomfort with Western services and treatment, knowing that because, like I said earlier, the values and worldview of our cultural background are not often respected, understood, seen, or held. A lack of awareness and knowledge of available resources because from our countries of origin, such services don't exist. So how would we know how to begin to look or what to make sense of the services that are being offered? I can't tell you how many times I worked with the immigrant community and then I would come in to work with one child and they're like, oh, are you going to take so-and-so, the other child with you? And it's like, oh, no. I'm only here for one of you. And having to explain my role, my limitation, my services over and over and over, right? Like, here, I got this letter from the attorney. Can you translate it? Actually, I can't because, right? And again, it's a whole new experience for them. And then insurance access also is a barrier, especially for the undocumented community. I'm going to show you this quick video around the parent-child separations in 2018, which was another inhumane, cruel way to detour people to come to the U.S. Some of what was been said is that part of the strategies to have even the media demonstrate what's being demonstrated right now worldwide is to try to detour families from coming. A commercial that keeps playing out here, if you watch YouTube in El Salvador, because I'm currently in El Salvador, is Christy Nome telling people don't come to the U.S. and sending images in that video, in that ad, of what will happen if you do. And it keeps playing out. It's purposely being done. So let me play this video.
¿De dónde son ustedes? ¿Y tú?
Guatemala.
No llores.
Papá.
I have put in place a zero tolerance policy for illegal entry on our southwest border. If you cross the border unlawfully, then we will prosecute you. It's that simple.
Adults, if they are accompanied by a child, that child is temporarily separated from them as they go through a judicial process.
Yes, ICE is the conduit for OR.
DHS will faithfully execute the laws enacted by Congress as we are sworn to do.
The United States will not be a migrant camp.
Mr. President, don't you have kids? Don't you have kids, Mr. President?
These children are not animals.
We're gonna have a lot of happy people.
So at the end of that video, even though Trump signed to reunify families, it was because the ACLU sued them in court and they won. but the administration took no steps to reunify families together, especially the ones that were deported back to their countries of origin without their children. The ACLU had to go on foot to go find those families, and some families were not reunified at all. And there were programs up until recently to support these families who were impacted by this, and they got defunded. Okay. So I'm not going to go on to this slide, but this one talks a little bit more about the impact of the forced parent-child separations and how many children are often part of migration trends and are often seeking asylum, right, and safety from their countries of origin to that have this trauma impacted on them. So when there is these forced parent-child separations, either by what you watched in the video or what's currently happening right now in the US, it definitely increases the risk of poor mental health outcomes and health outcomes for children and families, but especially the children. So in addition to putting children in situations where they experience fear and helplessness, the forced separation among children and their parents threatens the attachment bond. Children may initially respond by experiencing fear, distress, crying, and urgency. As the separation continues, children may feel despair, weakened crying, and the rejection of alternative adults. A prolonged absence of the attachment figure, children may become passively compliant and present as settled in, when it can actually be a submission response from their nervous system, a state of survival. These responses impact the reunification with attachment figures and may be ambivalent and rejecting due to attachment damage. So even if children and parents end up together again, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a smooth reunification, and it wasn't when the parent-child separations were happening in 2018. And we have children who are also being deported along with their parents. I don't know if anyone's seen inside some of these trucks where people are put in, where these narrow compartments that children and people adults are being placed in there. I don't know if you saw a video of a woman who was like, I can't breathe while I'm in here, and try to force herself out of the truck. And children are being placed in this. Children with cancer being deported. Right? Things that are just horrific are happening that is impacting the health and the mental health of all these children and families. Like I said, these type of response to immigration are inhumane, and there are ways to detour people from arriving. What else would I want to talk about? Yes, I want to acknowledge the ICE raids have increased throughout the country. They're now able to detain folks in schools, churches, and without due process in several cases, and that has happened. Individuals who are engaging in legal process of becoming documented, the cases are being dismissed by the government, and ICE has been waiting outside the courthouses like it's bait and trap to detain these individuals. We are experiencing escalating threats and changes with the mass deportations continuing. Also, the challenge to birthright citizenship for children born of undocumented parents. I mean, that's already put forward. It just hasn't been upheld. Increased militarization. Again, think about the trauma of seeing these people with guns, seeing these people with, I mean, ICE agents were obviously, they're not even trained. The way they move and handle people, they're not trained. Wearing masks, wearing combat gear, being intimidating. Eliminating popular relief programs like asylum seekers, TPS, what's going to happen with DACA, and removing due process. The Fifth Amendment provides due process of law, meaning a person has certain rights when it comes to being prosecuted for a crime. The 14th Amendment also says no state can deny to any person within the jurisdiction equal protection of the laws. And Trump has said he was pushing to deport some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth, but courts are getting in his way. He said, I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it. Many Venezuelans and Salvadorians were removed from the country, especially those who were already detained without due process, with the basis that they are dangerous criminals and gang members. However, the evidence for these labels involve tattoos, including autism awareness tattoo, Real Madrid soccer, and others, and also their race and ethnicity, as those being removed did not have due process to confirm other concerns or charges, like other than those things. You're tattoo and you're Latino, you're a gang member. So I want to read you a couple of slides around this. There's a lot of dehumanization that's happening. Let's start with the gang members because those are supposedly the criminals, even though those are not who are being targeted currently right now and being detained. But let's go off of this propaganda. Let's replace the message. We, the US, are deporting illegal and all unlawful aliens, Latinos, alleged gang members to El Salvador's prison when they were being deported to Secot. Let's replace it with this. European whites are removing and trafficking indigenous people from stolen and colonized land to land that's been impacted by imperialism and therefore has also been stolen and colonized and has a government that is profiting from the labor exploitation of the privatization of imprisoning indigenous people. That's what's happening. What do these folks have in common? They're indigenous. They're brown. That's it. That video you watched of US intervention, look on the left-hand side. It's not the best language being used, but for the sake of simplifying it, right? Look at who has all the resources. Look where the resources were taken. Poor countries are not underdeveloped. They're overly exploited. And who did the exploitation? Who dried up the watering hole? And then created borders. So even with Bukele, who's the president of El Salvador, who was the first one in line, who's like, we'll take your deported. And how Bukele right now is another one who's growing in authoritarianism and fascism. And his movement towards incarcerating supposedly just Salvadorian gang members and criminals. So let's consider this reframe again. Bukele is torturing, exploiting, and enslaving indigenous people who have purposely been impoverished, marginalized, and oppressed to the point that survival became putting on the costume of the European white colonizers and settlers, oppressors, and abusers. Proximity to power equals safety, and the way we often survive as humans, we copy those with the most power. Gangs have typically come from social oppression and marginalization of resources, including poverty and discrimination. Putting all that together creates the perfect brew and stew for gang membership. And who are they imitating? Are they being just as violent as the European settlers were? Some indigenous people merely learned and copied how the power was modeled for by European whites through abuse, murder, control, and dominance. So let's talk about the impact. These deportations continue to give displacement, exile, and loss of home. Attachment ruptures between children and parents, which affects the development of children, including their own internalization of the self and how they view themselves. I'm not worthy to have my parents. I'm not worthy to feel safe. I'm not worthy to be in a country to provide for me in a way that my country of origin did not. Emotional stress and trauma, fear, anger, stress, and sadness. Behavioral impacts among children, sleeping and eating disruptions and physical ailments. Housing instability because of economic hardship and food insecurity, which may place children at risk for child welfare involvement. Impact on parental supervision. And also, by the way, the fact that they're removing children in the foster care system who are undocumented as well. Where are they taking them and with who? Impact on parental supervision because parents are being deported, internalized stigma, and potential threat to life, especially for families who leave home because of seeking safety and financial security. And this, folks, when there's this level of fear and terror caused in societies, people stop going to church, school, health clinics, culture activities, and the services that we offer because it becomes unsafe. So let me take a couple minutes and then I'll wrap up in 30 minutes as best as I can. What do you think is the potential of the impact? And I mentioned some of it, right? But on these systemic powers where people end up feeling so powerless and helpless on children and families. What would be not only the current impact, but generational? What gets internalized? Thank you, Jorge. He mentioned too, it's important to highlight the trauma that happens with the border countries. So when folks are coming from Central America, what happens in Mexico on the way here and how Mexico may receive them. And usually there's a lot of animosity and concern and risk of violence, etc. So thank you, Jorge. Yes. But yeah, folks, what are you seeing or what do you believe are the potential impact of parent-child separation because of system harm and failures?
I think for one, you know, we touched a little bit about history repeating itself. Those patterns is what then is internalized, you know, that internal racism, hatred towards one's own people, which comes with, again, the disconnection, the lack of empathy, the lack of concern, and that impacts our tribal mindset, right?
Yes.
It impacts the way that we treat them, one another, our family members.
Yes, Marlene. Yes, that's a big one. We internalize this, and as a result, it not only creates rifts within ourselves, but with each other. And then the support network that was our strength that we're supposed to rely on has been inherently damaged. Or it feels that way. Hence my estranged brother. Right? Because my brother definitely internalized whiteness a lot more than I did, to the point where it's really hard for me to engage with him. He even has changed his name to a more white sounding name once upon a time. Okay. Yes. Julio says here, constant fear, insecurity, low self-esteem. Also says cultural shock. Yes, especially think about the children who came very young or were, you know, came very young and then were deported with their parents back to their countries of origin, but they don't have any memories of it. Right? Rejection of their own culture to protect themselves, feeling a loss of belonging. It will negatively impact their self-esteem and self-worth, which will turn them more susceptible to accepting abuse. Oh, yes, Saskia. Uncertainty, children may not understand what is going on and how long it will last. That is a very real thing. Yes. And who's having the time to narrate for them, to explain what is happening? And do parents understand what's happening? Especially when we already have internalized oppression and racism. Maybe some people feel like this is what I deserved. And that gets passed on to their children. And then for Catherine, being an immigrant myself, I constantly feel like an imposter, not belonging. Something that I say is that I have an abusive relationship with Uncle Sam. And it's peaked, man. It's peaked during these times. And if I think about it more right now, I'm going to like tear up. So I'm going to try my best to say it very quickly because I started it. I have spent a life trying to fit into the US, be a part of the US, feel like a sense of belonging. And that's what happens a lot in abusive relationships, right? Folks want the approval of this abusive partner and want to be loved, want the affection, because the short little moments that they've given it to us, it feels really, really good. But what does Uncle Sam do? You don't belong. You're less than human. Your parents were criminals. Maybe you are too, because we want to take away birthright citizenship. But yet I can't seem to break up with Uncle Sam because I rely on him for financial security, for perceived safety, for as long as we had it. Right? So it creates this abusive dynamic with Uncle Sam. Okay. How can we approach supporting the families? What I'm going to go into here is talk about how you're likely doing all these things, and also in a way we're very limited, but we're also very mighty and powerful in our times of connection with families and youth. Think about times when you've needed support and someone just gives you a hug or reassuring smile, and how that goes a long way. When my clients have ended services with me and they say really positive things, I'm like, well, but what worked? Like, what made it feel positive for you? It's never the fancy therapeutic interventions that I try to bring in, or worksheets or whatever else I do. You know what they say? You were warm and kind. I didn't feel judged by you. That 101 stuff of what it means to be human and compassionate is the secret ingredient to all this, and it's not so secret. So remember that. Okay? So what does it mean to hold space for someone? It means that we're willing to walk alongside another person in whatever journey they're on without judging them, make them feel inadequate, and trying to fix them or trying to impact the outcome. When we hold space for other people, we open our hearts, offer unconditional support, and let go of judgment and control, which means that we ourselves have to regulate our system so we don't move too fast and do, action. Because especially when you're experiencing trauma, you're so damn overwhelmed, you can't take another step. You need someone to sit down with you to grieve what's happening, to ground with you. And co-regulation is really powerful. Remember trauma-informed care, that it's coming from not what's wrong with you, what's happened to you. And that's very fitting with what's happening to communities right now. I won't go into this for the sake of time in terms of these 5 core principles, but I want to highlight a couple of them. And I'm going to give you a handout alongside with our slides today. And that handout, what I did is I created I did each of the principles, I defined each of them, and then it's a worksheet for you to think about ways that you can bring in these elements to your work or already are doing. And I recommend you doing it and filling out, because again, sometimes we do things without thinking we're doing them or that they're having a positive effect. And if we sit down and fill out that worksheet, we'll realize how much you are already doing beautiful work with families who are impacted. So 1, increasing a sense of safety and security. No intervention will work if safety is not attended to first. So when folks are feeling unsafe, what's one area in their life that feels safe? Is it a relationship? Is it a relationship with you, a partner, a friend, a child? Is it when they take a shower? Is it when they're in bed? Is it when they're home? Is it when they're on their call with their family member in Mexico? Helping them find those opportunities for safety and to really practice mindfulness of relishing those moments. Collaboration empowerment. Because of the history that I reviewed very briefly, it's so important that we recognize the family's voice and choice. This is a time for them to feel empowered. How have you coped in your family to get to here today? How do we build off that? How are you surviving and thriving now? Worst case scenario, what do you want to do if the worst case scenario happens? And how can I support you in achieving that? Choice and voice. The last one, resiliency and recovery, believing in people's capacity to heal, even in dire circumstances. People can be resilient. And our people in the Latinx community have demonstrated that throughout history that we are. Therefore, recognizing and acknowledging that trauma also relates to historical, cultural, racial, and gender issues, and they're alive and kicking. Recognizing the difference between culture and trauma is really important. So we're not replicating inadvertently colonialism or racism or bias. So I want to read you this quote from Reza Menachem. Trauma decontextualized in a person looks like personality, which is why we have a trauma-informed perspective, so we can separate the person from their trauma. Let's go into systems that are bigger. Trauma decontextualized in a family looks like family traits. So let's not judge families for substance use, for intergenerational abuse. Let's try to understand what happened to that family versus what's wrong with that family. And trauma decontextualized in people looks like culture. A way to liberate from this is to ask yourself the following two questions. When I observe a negative observation in a cultural group, is it due to my bias stemming from a Western white supremacist lens? Or is it because I need to integrate a trauma-informed lens and then I have to ask what happened to this group versus what's wrong with this group? Also, there's various values in our cultural cells as Latinas where we believe in familismo, family, personalismo. That means like connecting with each other, right? Getting along with each other. And how do we bring that in to our work as interventions? I had a client who was a mom from Guatemala. And when I tried to do therapy in a way of like, what do you think and what do you believe? She wouldn't answer. She would talk about like my family. My family says this, my family does that, my family here, my family that. She never said I. She was truly that collectivist. So I had to shift my interventions to be like, tell me about your family. What does your family think about this? What's your family gonna do? And think about the kindergartners that we work with that come from these collectivist families. And then we ask them, what do you think and feel? And then they're like, what? Because no one asked them that because you're not supposed to, right? It's a more interdependent culture. So what if we change it to, what does your family think? Right? And so that goes with honoring the dignity and roots and origin of families and being curious about like, what did they leave behind? Who did they leave behind? And so now in the reverse, if there's a risk of deportation, who's still out there for you in your country of origin? Is there a church you belong to? Is there a community? Would they be accessible to you if you go back? Relational approach is really important for us. So small talk is important. Getting to know you as a provider is important. You don't have to share your deepest, darkest secrets, but you can say, you know, I have a dog I really like, right? I grew up in the Bay Area. Like you can say various things that people can connect with you as human, right? And then also solution focus is important, especially during times like this. When there's crisis, people need containment and need steps on what to do. I'm going to give you a handout that the way I broke it up, and let's see if I have a little bit of time. Let's see if I can do this kind of quickly. Let me stop sharing and then share it. I did this for a case management training, but I think it'll be really relevant and it's life domains. And I'm going to show you what I did. All right, it's not opening up. Come on. Oh, there it goes. Yeah. Okay, so this is a worksheet I did on various life domains like basic needs, health and mental health, family, educational, financial, the list goes on, okay? And I did it specifically for the Latinx community. So what I have here on the left-hand side is, how did historical and collective trauma impact this life domain? So through generations of colonization, oppression, and racism, many families have not had steady access to address their basic needs, which has increased the risk of being impoverished and not meeting basic needs. Many families are first-generation immigrants or newcomers, and therefore, after typically fleeing unrest and poverty in their country of origin, they arrive to the U.S. to start anew with limited resources. And so when we think about it and break it down this way, what are some supports that you can offer to address that life domain? And in turn, you are addressing what's on the left-hand side that feels so big, but you're making it so concrete and fitting. Does that make sense? Many families in the Latinx community may experience discrimination and overpatholization due to their values and belief, which impacts their trust and participation in health services. Many families believe in folklore, indigenous knowledge, and medicine and other traditional forms of healing, and therefore may not be comfortable with all types of Western service delivery. So how can you approach your work? And so on. So I hope that that helps in giving you some ways to operationalize or make in concrete steps some of the support that families need to feel safer during these times. And what if you were to apply that with not just in the US, but should they return to their countries of origin? Okay. All right, I think I might have missed something in the chat. Let me see. Okay. All right, folks, that was still chiming from what we were talking about earlier. Thank you for those contributions. Okay, and on this slide, it talks about supporting families in fear of deportation. When COVID was happening, that was a really big issue where it was like, if the world doesn't feel safe, how can the family home feel safer? It doesn't mean it'll feel absolutely safe, but safer. If we think about it like a scale, 0 to 5, if folks are not feeling safe and they're at a 1, how do we get them to a 2, at least at home, where they have more agency and control? So we want to provide support to parents to manage their own anxiety, because if parents are anxious, guess who else will be anxious? Right? And so that means, how do we plug parents to support one another if there's a 2-parent home, other families who are going through what they're going through? There's some online groups, and I'm sure those are full. How do we create and mobilize families to create support networks within their community? Maybe with shared clients that you all have, you can create that, right? There's various ways. Like, I'm always in admiration with schools with the large Latina population, because the moms mobilize and they create a group together and they're huge activists, and that's very common, right? So how do we support families in doing that to manage their own anxiety as best as they can given the times? Support family in communicating with each other, support parents in listening to their children's fears and other feelings. That's something that doesn't come natural to us because of some cultural patterns that we may have. So it's important to recognize that, as you all who work with young people, you recognize that there is anxiety being felt by the children. The children expressing it and debriefing about it is going to help them. And if the parents are like, I got you, kiddo, like, that will help a lot. For older children, discuss how they may react and plan ahead. If your parents are detained and you come home from school and you don't find them, what's the plan? I'm going to talk about creating a family preparedness plan for separations, and it's important for us to be realistic that deportations could happen. Routines may increase a sense of security and safety. Consistency is important. When the world feels like it's falling apart, but folks know when lunch is up next or what's coming up in the evening, that helps a lot. Or what time should I be expecting my parents home, right? Like, that helps in knowing, like, this consistency is going to help me feel safe. That's what really helped a lot of kids during COVID. And then education about rights, know your rights, and stay informed about ever-changing policies that are happening so that you can preempt families as much as possible. For some providers, they've told me that they don't even know some of the families they work with are undocumented, because not all families want to share that, and especially with given the times, they might be more reserved. So one suggestion that I have is to offer resources like in the following way and say, given the current climate of conversation that I'm having with all of my families, is a list of these resources and supports. I would like to share them with you in case you find it helpful or you know people who will, and feel free to spread this along. That way you're not necessarily asking to out themselves around this. Remember that you can be a buffer of support and may not be in your power or role to stop deportations, but the collective is powerful. Look how many people showed up today. And so joining and organizing and advocacy and protests and calling your representatives, all those things matter and make a difference, especially in vast numbers, just like you showed up today. Consider empowering families with knowledge, resources, and other buffers that will support them in coping with their risk and feel empowered in this way. So the Know Your Rights workshops that I'm sure have picked up steam, and there's a lot more happening now. Legal resources, have them plug it into their phones that they have it. Supportive therapeutic services, right? And so I have another handout that I'll be sharing with you. They're Oakland based in the Bay Area. So hopefully it'll offer as a model for you. But the way that it's set up is that I give it in sections like interpreting services, mental health services, legal services. What else do I have on there? Also, maybe for providers, where you can get involved for organizing and advocacy efforts, who to donate to, right? So I have a list like that with like links in them. And so I'll be giving you that handout as well. And I'm going to give you a copy of the Family Preparedness Plan. If you go to the Immigration Legal Resource Center, they have Family Preparedness Plan, which is like a safety plan. In the event that they are deported, what is the plan in place? Where are your documents? Who's your safe person to call? What's going to happen to your children? How do you create like legal documentation for someone to take temporary caregiving for your kids or long-term caregiving for your kids in the event that you are missing? Do you want your children to go and reunify with you in your country of origin, or are they going to stay in the US with someone else? Like, how do we plan ahead? That is something that we all can facilitate with the families we work with. And before we go to secondary trauma providers, I just want to say this. Remember, for the Latina community, we have historically have resisted and survived for generations. Every time we've engaged in a war, migrated for a better life, worked a hard day, smiled and experienced joy, danced, sang, raised our children proud of who they are, voted, called our local representatives, told our stories, spoke our mother tongues, decolonized our foods, our clothes, our way of being, and so much more, we have survived and we have resisted. And we will continue to do so. No matter where we're dropped off on this earth, we will continue to do so. And then last but not least, you all. I'm very moved by your presence today. And I can see the engagement, even though I'm going fasted for 2 hours. And I thank you for that. And the community, I'm sure, is grateful for that. So I want to acknowledge your trauma as well as you do this work. Why do we experience this? Because we care about the youth and families we support. I will go as far as to say we love them. We see from human to human, we witness their stories, their lives, and we care deeply about the well-being of the people we serve. We witness through our work, social media, and the news, the harm that activates the following common emotions: powerlessness and helplessness, rage, fear, and terror. And I will take the risk to say that the current government policies are meant to have us feel this way. Because this divides, this shuts down, this shrinks us, this silences us. So let these emotions visit us, let them arrive, let them give us the information because they are appropriate and congruent to what's happening. But let them not sit there and build a camp in who you are, in your minds, heart, and souls. Don't let them take over. We have to resist these emotions as well. We also believe it's our responsibility to marginalize, oppress, and historically harmed communities, that we are supposed to do something to fix it, to make it better. But again, it feels like we're so small at times. And it's not just the families who are experiencing this trauma, it's collective trauma. So what can we do? This piece, powerless, helplessness, we're not. How many people went to protest on Saturday? Over 11 million. I was in tears and joy. I'm so upset I can't be out there because I'm here in El Salvador, but it was a dream. It was beautiful to see 11 million in the areas that I thought were kind of conservative and people weren't going to show up, still showed up. So community is the antidote to all of this, especially these emotions right here in the middle. Community. So organize within your organizations, organize in your neighborhood, organize where you can. Activism, call your representatives. If someone hasn't heard of the app, 5 Calls, I recommend it. It sends you to your representatives. It gives you the phone number and you can call on various issues. Flood those phones. Donate to the ACLU or other organizations. Since the parent-child separations, I tried to donate to ACLU because they are suing, and winning in the courts. Protest, whatever it takes, any form of activism. And there's not one way to do activism. It's not just protesting, right? I saw somewhere and I was trying to look for it before this training and I couldn't find more of the details because you had to pay, but there's this one diagram that's going around that talks about the various roles of activism, and there's like healer, disruptor, protester, like there's various ones that you can take on. Caregiving, that those matter, each of those roles, because it's not just you by yourself, it's us in community. And if we take up different roles, we're going to be touching different points here of resistance and healing. And then engage in self-care and community care, not just by ourselves. Seek out your safe places and people. Is it your bed? Because for me, I always say bed because that's my safest place in the world, right? Or is it like with your family? Is it at dinner time? Where is it? Debrief with others. It's a powerful step to healing. So when you witness things, when a family gets deported, when you see awful things on TV, call someone. I know that sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to traumatize them because they're going through it too. Let the person choose their own boundary. But when we all do that, then we pull away. Instead, if we go towards people and everyone goes towards each other, we can take turns being there for each other. And go back to the basics. How are you eating? How are you sleeping? Be your best in your professional roles, but also recognize your limitations, which is why we're stronger together, not by ourselves. Remember that we are responsible to our clients, but not for our clients. Okay. All right. Thank you for your patience in me rushing through. I wanted to make sure. Thank you, Alina. She found the diagram I was referring to, the various roles of activism. Thank you, Alina. But yes, okay, so I want to open it up because I want to make sure we have a few minutes to chat and see what's coming up for folks. Questions, thoughts, concerns. I'm going to put my email. If folks want to attend some other trainings that I'm a part of, I do a lot of them in the Bay Area. They're mostly geared in organizations that serve foster care youth and families. I say go ahead and ask to sign up and see if you can register. Sometimes some organizations, because it's Title 4E, has been kind of lenient. That's some of it that reduces because of certain policies that are happening, but it's worth a try still. And I'm also looking to do some private trainings in the near future once I get sponsored with CUs. And so folks are interested, feel free to email me to add you to my mailing list. But okay, thoughts, questions, concerns, wonderings.
May I say, Jeanette, let me put my camera back on here. I can say as an older Latino in my 60s, I think what's been hard for me and difficult is I feel this separation from my country, the United States, right? My origins is Mexico. I feel sad that I don't know my grandparents' journey here, but they came so that I could have a better life and so that I could go to college and do what I do. And I think that's why I work so hard in the nonprofits and trying to serve my community. I just want to read something very briefly so that we can all celebrate. My daughter wrote me the other day. She said, while protesting on the streets holds an important role, it is equally important to remember the everyday protest. While I was in San Francisco celebrating my best friend's wedding, I was still thinking about the state of the world and the marches happening in LA. However, the key aspects of this trip was joy, and it made me think that perhaps that was our protest. Three best friends, all Mexican women celebrating the joy of a wedding. One of us getting married as we got ready and shared laughter and stories. That was our protest. My best friend stood in a white dress as mariachis played in the small church. That was our protest. No matter how much this country may try to push us out, we're living and thriving and doing exactly what our families wanted to do, which is live better lives.
Powerful, Stephen. Thank you
We
for
have
sharing.
to go on. Yeah, thank you.
One of the things that I had said coming into El Salvador, the last 2 years I've been staying here. Last year I stayed 6 months. This time I stayed 5 months. It's always been my dream. I have strong ties here. I love it here. And it was always unsafe to be here, but I still made my way here. And I didn't come and stay a long time because of Bukele's intervention. I was planning to do that anyways because I was looking for a certain level of security to be able to do it. I shared this similar to what Stephen had said, though, where I feel that me coming here to El Salvador with the privilege that I have to be here in a safe and financially secure way to be able to work online is a privilege that I've earned. And I didn't earn it by myself. I earned it because my parents migrated to the US for a safer, better life. And as a result of what they did out there, they were able to afford me a life that now I can afford the privilege to come back to our land and enjoy our land in a way that doesn't feel scary like it does to my ancestors. It did to my ancestors and the people who continue to reside here. And so, yes, Stephen, I think that's a beautiful way to illustrate the acts of resistance and the way that we hopefully enjoy and find joy in the sacrifices of what our ancestors have given us. Anyone else? Thank you, folks. Thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being a collective. Okay, Sadie, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeanette. That was a wonderful way to spend our Monday morning all sharing together, and I really appreciate you. To everyone, Jeanette will share all the slides and the supporting documents, and I'll be emailing it over to everyone later today.